The grand finale of the season is a concert of two journeys, one through the uncertainty of modern life, and the other towards the enormously life-affirming optimism of Beethoven's credo, all men are brothers. We start with Thomas Adès and his masterpiece Asyla. We heard some of Thomas Adès' music last season with his Couperin pieces, which you might remember were three 18th century harpsichord pieces orchestrated for a modern orchestra. Now we're going to hear a piece which is entirely original from 1997. The title is typically suggestive and mysterious. Asyla is the plural of asylum. An asylum has a double meaning. It can either mean a place of refuge or an institution for the insane. The piece is effectively a symphony. It's 4 movements. It's immensely scored for a huge orchestra, including a large percussion section, a grand piano, and an upright piano which is tuned a quarter tone flat. It sounds a little bit like a piano that you might find in an old church hall. It's also immense in the emotional journey it telescopes into 25 minutes. The beginning of the piece is heralded by cowbells in the percussion. We hear a long, smooth melody in the horns. Things are always shifting with a restlessness in the bass, as if something's trying to break out from under the floor. And the textures are often stratified, which means that we'll have a lot of very high instruments, piccolos and violins in the stratosphere, and we'll have lots of things rumbling in the bass, but nothing in the middle. It's a texture that Beethoven actually often uses as well. The second movement is a slow piece, and it begins with a lamenting solo for bass oboe. You might have seen a bass oboe in The Planets at the beginning of the season. This particular bass oboe solo is very reminiscent of the English horn solo in the middle movement of the Franck D minor symphony. And underneath this bass oboe melody, the flat piano plays in the background, blurring our vision. It's as if we're seeing music slightly out of focus because the tuning has sunk by a quarter tone. The third movement is programmatic. It tells a story. It's also the only movement to have a title, and that title is Estasio, the Italian word for ecstasy. This is a picture of a 1990s London club rave, full of excitement and excess. We start hearing very, very high notes in the strings, and there's a gradual crescendo of a trance-like steady beat, exactly the way a dance track builds up, with one beat at the bottom that gets louder and louder as more instruments are added. The title, Estasio, refers to the thrill of this scene, as well as the drug that might accompany somebody attending it, ecstasy. The beats build in overlapping layers, creating great complexity, and this creates a feeling of exhilaration accompanied by a kind of creeping paranoia. The two worlds of Asyla again, the comforting and the terrifying. There's also a sense in this movement of everyone together, that sense you might have in a club of being at one with everybody around you. And this is something which is interesting in the context of Beethoven 9, with the line, Alle Menschen Brüder wieder, all men are brothers. The fourth movement is perhaps the day after the night out, although it's stretching the analogy. It's ominous, there's a cavernous bass-anchored chord that tells us all is not well. It might remind you of a feeling of a hangover. And the final pages give some sense of arrival, but as throughout the piece, we're unsure if we've arrived in a sanctuary or a hall of mirrors. After a journey that is at best ambivalent, we arrive at perhaps music's strongest journey from the swamp to the heavens. Beethoven's Ninth begins in a dark, unsettled, primeval place. This is music of great unrest and upheaval, as if it's struggling with the very nature of existence. The first movement has great ferocity. The opening rhythm places us in no man's land, but gradually, music of great force arises. In the second movement, that struggle turns into something more violent. There's an unrelenting energy to the rhythm of the second movement, and it's only when we reach the trio that we feel any sense of consolation and beauty for the first time. The third movement is the most astonishingly lyrical and beautiful, perhaps that Beethoven wrote for the orchestra. There's a sense of the grandeur of the human spirit. particularly as the movement progresses and we feel somebody growing in strength and warmth and dignity. And of course, there's the eventual triumph of the finale with Schiller's famous Ode to Joy, in which Beethoven reminds us that all men from every corner of the earth are one, are brothers. So please join us for this unusual concert. In some ways, it's a mixture of idealism and reality, both becoming more meaningful because of their juxtaposition. One of the greatest works of the 19th century, alongside the same from the late 20th century. We have the present and the future infused by the greatest of the past. And I can't think of a more appropriate note to strike as we end our first season together.